Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the Intelligent Developers, led by Andre Bueno and Jerrod Delaine. And today we have an inspiring guest, Mr. Richard Roberts. Rich, how are you?
I'm good. It's good to see you guys, and I'm really been looking forward to this with some degree of anticipation. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys.
Amazing. Amazing. Andre, how are you, sir?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking. I'm been really excited as well. Just to kind of, provide some initial questions. I'd love for you to be able to frame this out for us. But you know, Richard, you grew up where LeBron grew up. You've succeeded in city government. You've worked
Went to
on
the
Wall
same high
Street.
school. Went to the same high school.
Went to the same high school.
Yeah.
You've worked in the nonprofit space. You've worked in the private equity space. Seems like you've been able to transition across so many different sectors. You've established your credibility in each one of these different arenas. What was that core skill set that, your upbringing or your studies have taught you that got you to this point?
It's that's a really good question. I think I guess I would disagree. I know my wife would disagree, but I guess I would disagree the with the notion that somehow this has all been kind of planned or convenient. It's been some degree of bopping around. She would say I can't hold a job. Um, but I do think that there have been three things really for me that have been really important. One, I have uh, both in school and in the workplace valued relationships and the people I've come in contact above the institutions or organizations that either where I've went to school or the places where I've worked. I've found that the most opportunities have come from people in my life and the people that I've come in contact with, and I've always placed a priority on developing relationships. Um, I as a as a area of kind of academic, professional, and professional interest have always been interested in endeavors that were the intersection between the public and private. And I think that one of the reasons that I really like, and I think I've been drawn to affordable housing over all these years, is that it really is the model that we use all over the country is public-private partnership, and that's always resonated with me. I've always been someone when I was in the private sector, I think tried to take the concerns, the complications and challenges the public sector partners, face, and try to incorporate that into our problem solving, so that our approach isn't only about how what the private sector partners want, what's best for those that are working on it on the private side. And when I was in the public sector, right, I really tried to be enlightened about the challenges that private sector partners were facing in helping government deliver services. So I've always been, I've worked in healthcare, highly regulated, highly regulated industry, strong partnership between public and private. I worked in education reform, again, similar kind of approaches. And when I found affordable housing and started working in it, it really spoke to me, in that regard. So that's those are re- th- that's really been those have really been the things that have kind of guided me. And then I think on top of that, I've never been professionally risk averse. Like I understand that sometimes when you change jobs or you take a position or you do something that you venture into something new, that there is a chance that it will not work. And I've never been alarmed by that or overly concerned with it. I talk with a lot of young people who are interested in our industry, and I have young adult children, and I find that that generation is very focused on making the right move. The just the doing the right thing and considering kind of every angle and looking at things from and I think that's great. I think you should be thoughtful, intentional about the things you do, but I also think you can't be risk averse, right? You gotta be willing to try some things. I think that gets harder as you get older because there your options, you options may be a little bit more limited, but I think I really have benefited by not being overly risk averse and being willing to try things. Um, but I've had the guiding principles of being very focused on my network and working with people that I like working with and trying to build relationships. And at the same time, I'm very interested in the intersection of the public and private.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I would like to go back in time, sir.
Yeah,
Um, where did you go for undergrad college?
yeah.
And how did that environment shape the way you work in cities and community development today?
So I went to Yale College when I graduated from Akron, St. Vincent, St. Mary, the home of the Fighting Irish. When I graduated from St. V, I came to Yale, and I had been one day. I was in the cafeteria, and there was a recruiter from Yale, from the Yale admissions office, in the cafeteria. And I think I was the only person who kind of walked up to him and spoke to him. And he said to me at the time, and I think this is part of where a little bit of this kind of lack of risk aversion kind of comes into play. He said to me, "You should apply." I said, "Well, I don't think I can. I don't know that I'm you know qualified." He said, "Well, one of two things are happen: you'll get in or you won't." It's not, it's not, the world isn't going to end. You're not going to get sick. You're not going to catch anything. It's very binary, right? And I kind of thought about that and I said, he's right. So I applied. I'd never been further east than Pittsburgh. I came out to the East Coast, and I think one of the things that I probably was not, uh, as cognizant of as at the time, but I think looking back on it, it does it makes sense to me is that New Haven was a really interesting place, right? It was a place. Connecticut was very interesting. Connecticut had at the time was a state with the highest per capita income in the country. Um, you know, Most of that was concentrated in Fairfield County, right? The county immediately, north of New York, but with three of the 20 poorest cities in the country, right? New Haven, Hartford, and Bridgeport. And so New Haven reminded me a lot of Akron. A kind of a uh, Rust Belt city that had gone through tremendous economic change. When I entered kindergarten as a 5-year old, um, Akron, Ohio, the Akron, Ohio produced 90% of the tires that were utilized, bought, and sold in the United States. By the time I graduated from high school 13 years later, no tires were produced there. So if you think about, everybody that I knew, everyone's parents, everyone's my aunts and uncles, everybody worked for someone in the tire rubber industry. B.F. Goodrich, Goodyear, General Tire. By the time I graduated from high school, they had all lost their jobs. Like that had all changed. And so New Haven, as a place that was really going through some economic distress at the time, resonated with me. And I think, it probably formed my commitment to doing this type of work. Growing up in a place like that, and then going to school in a place that also had these kind of economic challenges, I think is probably something that was really formative, and it probably impacted me in ways that I probably you know don't didn't fully realize at the time. Then I stayed there for law school, so I was there for 7 years, and then came to New York.
And then early in your career,
Yeah,
you worked at the mayor's office, correct? Your
I
first
did. Yeah,
public
yeah.
role. How was that as a young person?
I had a really good experience. I had applied to the Dinkins administration when I was at the law firm and never heard from them. And when the
Mhm.
Giuliani people came in, they found my resume on a stack of resumes that had been left behind. And they called me and asked me whether I would be willing to come in. And I said, well, I'm not a Republican. And they said, at that time, it's kind of hard given, how the mayor's, life has taken various turns and so forth. It's hard to kind of remember this, but at the time that he came in '94, I would say 75% of the administration was comprised of Democrats. I mean, there weren't any Republicans really in New York to work in the administration. And shortly after I got there, the mayor endorsed you know Dad Cuomo um, for governor, as opposed to endorsing Pataki, and that was in large part because Pataki was a close political ally of Alphonse D'Amato, and Giuliani and D'Amato were sworn enemies, and so that was kind of a big that was a big thing. But you can't imagine that now, given how partisan and how blindly partisan most politicians are now in the current environment. So it was a really heady experience. The administration was really focused on trying to improve service delivery, trying to, um, you know, we call it reinvent government. That was a big part of what we were trying to do, and so it was really interesting, and it was a lot of fun. Um, so I had a really good experience.
And then eventually you would go on to work in HPD,
Yeah,
in the housing and preservation. So for those who aren't in New York City, if
yeah,
you could give a brief kind of overview of HPD and your role there.
yeah, sure. So when I was in the mayor's office, one of the things I had done was I had focused on what part of my portfolio was to deal with some economic development projects and also some affordable housing projects. And so when the position at HPD came open, I was someone who had been, working in the mayor's office. That the folks there who were making decisions about staffing were familiar with not only me but also familiar with the fact that I had worked on, HPD projects. And so there are it's New York City, right? Two football teams, two baseball teams, two housing agencies. We have the NYCHA, the New York City Housing Authority, which is essentially deals with public housing in New York City. I think there are 400,000 units or whatever of public housing in New York, and then uh, HPD, which is a combination of a community development agency, a housing production agency, and also a enforcement and regulatory agency. The what we refer to in the law as the warranty of habitability, which is kind of the basis on which folks who own property, or the standard of which they are governed for providing uh, safe, decent, and habitable housing, is codified in something in New York called the Housing Maintenance Code, and HPD has a group of inspectors and a whole set of people who are focused on making sure that housing units in New York comply with basic with basic conditions of habitability. So really 3 parts of that agency: community development, housing production, and housing maintenance. And when I got there, 3,000 employees, a combined capital and operating budget of about 1.5 billion. It's much bigger now, but at that time, it was not a. And meanwhile, when I got there, I had never, I had managed maybe 1 or 2 people, and so to go there at 31 and be responsible was pretty significant responsibility, but we had a great time, and I think we did a pretty good job of it.
And it seems like a lot of your time really at HPD like shaped a lot of your views on balancing public purpose and like political realities. But how did you kind of make that transition from there into Goldman Sachs?
Yeah, that was a difficult transition because I had worked in the law firm. Yeah, I worked in a private law firm, which I think culturally was very similar. I worked at a law firm called Davis Polk, and people there, I would say both at Davis Polk and Goldman are, incredibly smart. Phrase I like to use is kind of aggressively collegial. They kind of they over communicate. They involve a lot of people. There's a lot of shared decision making. But I had not really been exposed to the finance side of things. It's a very quantitative place, very focused on, dollars and cents, and making the numbers add up, and that was something that I really had to kind of learn and get my mind around. But they did a very nice job of exposing me to a variety of things, not just in the context of what the Urban Investment Group was focused on, but private equity more broadly and generally. Um, I went to the merchant bank's investment committee every week and sat there and just listened and heard about all the, multi-billion-dollar investments they were making, and whether they were buying media companies or steel companies or what have you. Like I sat in on those discussions, and that really helped me transition to being to having an investor mindset. I don't know, I still wonder, even at this point, having been on the investment side of it for so long, I still wonder if I can correctly or appropriately characterize myself as an investor. But I certainly uh, got a tremendous amount of exposure when I was at Goldman. And when we tried to refine our program, and we focused really on 2 things there, we focused on emerging real estate, right? And we also focused on minority and women-led enterprises. So we invested in everything from, you know, uh, real estate in West New York, New Jersey, to making a fund investment in a private equity fund that focused on minority-owned companies. So I got exposed to a lot and really enjoyed the variety of the things that we dealt with there.
But that's really like what also makes you so, I guess, unique. You're not just an investor, but an urban investor because you're looking at the urban landscape. You're looking at, how to assess, policy risk. You're underwriting those emerging developers and coming up with your own thesis. Very different than just like investing in Ford, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think what we do in the affordable housing realm is so nuanced, right? I mean, I think there are aspects of it that are formulaic, right? I mean, what I do now, which is focused on primarily LIHTC projects, that can be because it is a government program, um, um, sponsored by the IRS, implemented by the states, governed by qualified allocation plans and IRS rules, and regulations. Some of that can be really formulaic, but embedded in that structure, right? There are a lot of judgment calls you have to make about where, with whom, how, um, that I think are equal part art and science, and I think require, as you I think correctly point out, an appreciation not only of what's going on with the deal specifically, but also in the landscape around it, adjacent, before, after. You think about all of those things when you look at these types of projects and make determinations as to what you want to support.
When I was in grad school, Rich, I was a student council president at NYU Shack, and this
Mhm.
young man came up to me and said, "Hey, we should create an affordable housing group." And I said, I don't know if there's enough demand for that. I don't know if there's enough students. Most students were going and working at wonderful large organizations.
Yeah.
He said, "No," and I said, "You know what? Go for it. Create it." So he created an affordable housing subcommittee where he would have different executives
Yeah.
come to a boardroom and speak with students. And the very first one, he had Alicia Glenn come and
Yeah.
talk about uh, Goldman Sachs Urban Investment Group. I'd never heard of it before.
Yeah.
And she came in and was explaining how, Goldman Sachs was raising capital and deploying it in these creative ways that you're
Yeah.
talking about, in ways that people don't think about, like buying existing affordable housing and
Yeah.
preserving it, investing in mixed income communities like Essex Crossing. Like it is absolutely fascinating, that
Yeah.
that strategy and
Yeah.
type of investing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we to go back to the Light Tech program, right? Light Tech program is very structured. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of can't things you can do, things you can't do. And I think as
Right.
people got into um, really looking at the problems that many of these neighborhoods and communities faced, they started to realize that there were strategies, solutions, approaches that were needed beyond the formulaic, right? So, for example, when I worked in the mayor's office, one of the things I worked on was a program called Anchor, Alliance for Neighborhood Commerce, Homeownership, and Revitalization, right? And that was the acronym. And it was a very simple concept, which was for the first time, HPD was going to sponsor projects that included not only housing, but either adjacent, nearby, or ground floor retail. Now, sitting where we're sitting today, right? The idea that a building, an affordable housing building, multifamily building, would be a mixed use building is kind of a no brainer. Like you wouldn't even like, right? You wouldn't even that would not give you pause, right? But in 1994, that did not happen. That was not a thing, right? You had to either, you know, you had to build the residential and hope that the retail, hope that the services, hope that the community amenities came as a result of either, critical mass or um, critical mass or demographic and a socioeconomic improvement in a local community, right? Um, and the idea and what we saw then was it often never materialized, right? It never timed up right. It was never it was unless it wasn't intentional, so it kind of happened, happenstance. And um And it wasn't until we kind of got more intentional about it, right, that we saw more improvements in this area, understanding that if people move to a community, they want to be able to shop in that community. They want to be able to work in that community. They want to be able to, have amenities in that community, right? And that was that's a big part of ultimately how capital has now responded, because we've been intentional about how we want to go about this, and then capital has responded. Now, sometimes it doesn't respond elegantly. It doesn't respond in a way that's actually, user friendly. LIHTC investors still worry about too much commercial income in a project. They're like, why are we worried about that? Like, as a matter of fact, you would think we want more commercial income, right? We would want more thriving businesses near and around the residential that we create. But they have a different mindset as it relates to their underwriting and their approach, and they haven't fully come along. So it's not always effective or elegant in terms of how we respond, but we are getting better. We are getting better.
Love it. Love it. So you go from Goldman,
Cool.
incredible. And eventually you take a leadership role at a nonprofit development organization,
Yeah.
the Doe Fund.
Yeah.
So you've worked in government, you've worked in high finance down on Wall Street,
Yeah.
and now you're working, at a nonprofit
Well, I
development
try.
firm.
It's funny. I try to an unknown part of the story is, I tried to develop, tried to be when I stepped out of Goldman, the plan was for me to be a developer, and I'm not good at it. And I think that's an important, thing for people to understand. And I try to
Right.
tell this to young people all the time. Not everybody can, not everybody can be on the financial side of it. Not everybody is good with community. Not everybody can be a developer. Not everybody can be a banker. You really have to combine all the things I mentioned earlier. Your principles, your training. You also have to you have to combine that with a self-awareness and a self-knowledge that is honest and accurate, right? I am not the greatest project manager. I don't have the risk tolerance. I don't have the risk tolerance for, guarantees. I'm not married to somebody who has a risk tolerance for guarantees, which was even a bigger deal. What are we signing? Why are we signing this? So I found that if I wanted to do development, right, that I needed to probably go to a platform. And that was a pretty good platform. I really enjoyed working at the nonprofit. I really believed in the mission of that organization. So many of the client base, looks like us, the three of us on this call. There is a a but for the grace of God element to all their stories. Um, Many of them, it was a unexpected turn of events or thing that led to their homelessness, their incarceration, their, whatever was affecting them that led them to that situation. So that really resonated with me. And I did that for 5 years. That was enough time to do it. I did it. I feel like I contributed, and then I was looking to do something else, and I ultimately ended up at Redstone.
It's so fascinating, just kind of hearing about your trajectory, the different steps you've taken along the way, how these lessons really have, compounded and provided you such a great framework for, being able to move on to the next chapter. Um, no, I guess one question I have is like, as you think about your work at Redstone, which is now, I was reading, I guess, the most recent press release. You guys put out 13 billion last year.
No, we've got we have 13 billion since inception. I
Okay,
think we put out 1.7 billion last year. Yeah.
understood.
Yeah.
Understood. And you look at the cost of where light tech is today. Like, it's a funny statistic. You were saying, HPD, they probably have about 400,000 units. That's 80% of the housing shortage in Los Angeles County right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the light tech system is still not comprehensive enough to really be able to fit all the demands of this
Yeah.
this new era.
Yeah.
Um, so from like I guess a pattern recognition standpoint, on one hand, what have you seen be successful in the other roles that you've worked in? And, do you think that sort of framework is an area that, a traditional company like the one you're working at um, might start looking into?
Yeah. That's a good question. Look, I think that there was something done. I don't know, maybe it was maybe over a decade ago. I'd have to look up when they did it, but there was something called the Bipartisan Commission on Housing, and Henry Cisneros and a couple other people, Ron Terwilliger, were a part of that. And one of the things they did is they issued a report, and then as part of that report, the issuance of that report, they went around to all the state housing conferences and gave a stump speech. And I heard, because we do this all over the country, because we are active in a lot of different states, because I, along with another one of my partners, am in the position to kind of oversee acquisitions, and we are, so I work with a lot of our originators and our local folks who are active in various states, and so I get to these states, even though I maybe not doing much on a day to day basis, but I do get to Maryland, and I do get to, Illinois, and I do get to California a bit, and Missouri and Florida, and get to see, some of the stuff that goes on. But one of the things that Cisneros used to say when he gave the stump speech is that he would applaud everybody in the room. They were all housing people, all housers, and he'd say, "Listen, housing is a calling, and it's like a lot of it's like pastoral care, or some of the things that people do, medicine, the ministry. People feel passionate about it, and they feel, and while most of the people who are involved are people who have, at this point, have stumbled into it. I think most people, once they get involved, feel pretty passionately about it. The downside of that is that a lot of there is a tendency to kind of unduly and overly internalize your job, and I think that a lot of us feel as though the entirety of the affordable housing problem that the country and communities face is our responsibility, and while we feel this great degree of passion about helping to impact the solutions, we feel inadequate in our inability to affect it positively. When I went to the city in 1990, when I went and started working in city government in 1994, there were the same communities that were the lowest indicators of on every social determinative health, socioeconomics, you know unemployment, educational attainment. The same communities that were at the bottom of the list 30 plus years later, almost 40 years later, same communities, right? And this is after tens of billions of dollars of investment, and uh, not just in terms of money, but in people hours and commitment and policy prescriptions, right? it's Sisyphean, right? And it's only with the benefit of age and experience I have come to um uh I'm at peace with the fact that um the particular role I'm playing now, the particular organization I'm with now, and what we do is enough, right? We're doing all we can do, and we have to, at the end of the day, believe that that's enough. And our tool, LITEC, right, is only between 25 and 30 billion of the, uh, you know, uh, it's that's a relatively small market in the pantheon of U.S. economic activity, right? 25 billion is nothing. Um, and so we understand that we can only impact a portion of this, but zoning and fair housing and economic activity and development, um, um, income and job supports. I mean, I had a long conversation today with someone who's running a credit union about how we think about affordability only in terms of what things cost. Housing costs too much, right? We don't think about affordability in terms of helping low income, moderate income people keep more of their money, be more financially empowered, get better jobs, make more money. That is equally important in this whole affordability equation, right? And what we have is, I think, on both sides of the aisle, is kind of a lack of creativity about this. I mean, you have I am certainly believe that the rent is too high. I certainly believe for tons of people, but I also don't believe that that a effective solution will be freezing rent for a small portion of the New York City population. And I understand that the mayor has a more probably has a more expansive policy set of policy prescriptions and strategies that he and his team want to pursue. But I do think that it's very convenient to say, well, it's landlord's fault. It's the we can freeze rent. Or in other parts of New York State, we can impose rent regulation. That's gonna solve it. That's not the only thing that impacts this equation. And I think the people we serve and people we work on behalf of deserve more creative, more expansive solutions than I think some of the things that are being put out.
But that's kind of a sign of the times, right? Like people being so dissatisfied with the existing system, not feeling engaged, and then at the same time feeling that the only ability for them to rise up is to be extractive.
Yeah, I couldn't. I don't think I could say it any better. I think that's absolutely right.
Dang, I wish I was wrong.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah,
Yeah, we need more creativity. I think what did they say? To a guy with a hammer, everything's a nail.
yeah,
So some of us thinking that it must be this way, and as you know, Rich, the business model doesn't work the same way it did before.
yeah.
There's been an evolution, and we should evolve the business model with it. So
That's right.
lots of work to do. Lots of work to
That's
do.
right. That's right.
All right. So you are also the chairperson of a couple of boards, sir.
Yeah,
If you could talk a little bit about Citizens Housing and Planning Council.
yeah. So Citizens Housing Planning is a 90-plus-year-old think tank um, focused on New York City zoning, planning, land use, um, affordable housing. Uh, we have a 90, almost 100 member plus board, which really kind of has us. I would more characterize us more as a membership organization. because our board members really do help us kind of inform our policy prescriptions or research. We really do take the lead from them as to the things we should be looking into and reviewing. Um, we have an incredible archive of New York City related housing materials, including we've got a recording of a radio show about restrictive race related covenants in Stuytown and Peter Cooper. Um, they wanted MetLife employees to live there, but not black ones. And so we've got a lot of information, and we make it available to researchers, but we also do research ourselves. And it's been, and I think to Andre's earlier question, one of the reasons that I've gotten engaged in a lot of these different organizations is a recognition that what I do on a daily basis is affecting one part of the problem, but we got to do other things. And so, as an example, we're really proud of the fact that so many of the recommendations that we advanced about how to move development forward in New York City were incorporated into the City of Yes set of proposals, and also the ballot initiatives that got voted on in November to enhance and improve the ability to develop affordable housing in New York. So it's not only about the money, which we provided Redstone. It's also about the policy, the zoning, the entitlement process. That is a big part of what is going to enable us to unleash the private sector to build more housing and to make more housing available. And CHPC was really instrumental in a lot of that work.
Fantastic. So, Rich, you had this incredible journey.
Mhm.
Um, Knowing what you know today,
Yeah.
what advice would you give 18-year-old Rich walking into Yale, walking into St. Vincent's, doesn't know what he's going to do in life? What advice would you give?
Well, I think I I don't know that other than the mistakes I've made to try to avoid them, but who can predict, who can affect that really, going back and talking to your younger self. You kind of, I think that uh as a general matter, I'm pretty comfortable with how I've approached things. And I don't know that I would approach things much differently other than trying to avoid some mistakes. I do think, just as a personal matter, I would tell young people, and I would tell my younger self that I probably needed to be a little bit more intentional about diving into um, situations and things that stretch my comfort zone, right? Things that you know, um, I have a particular thing with, I lost my the tips of two of my fingers in an accident when I was a child, and I find that my left index finger, when I'm doing things like I don't know, doing things where I'm using my fingers or using my hands, I find that what I do is I fold that finger back and I don't use it. And it's a metaphor for, I think we all know our particular strengths and weaknesses. And I think what I have done is I've become particularly adept at masking and working around my weaknesses, as opposed to embracing them and strengthening them. And I think if I had to give, and I try to do this with my own children to, to a limited amount of success. But I think if I had to go back and talk to myself, it would be like, listen, the things that make you uncomfortable, the things that you don't feel you're good at, try to improve. You don't need to be expert. You don't need to be the most quantitative person in the world, just as an example, but you do need to get a lot more comfortable with numbers than you are. Um, you need to be, you need to, embrace certain situations, or not, the, be more open to and embrace conflict, that kind of thing, like somebody who kind of, tries to avoid conflict a little bit. These are things that when you identify them as weaknesses, I think you should really try to strengthen them as opposed to working around them and compensating for them.
Amazing. We're going to stop it there. Rich, thank you so much. We truly appreciate it.
No, I appreciate working with you guys, and just let me know how I can get it out on my various platforms and feeds.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the
Fantastic.
time.
Fantastic.
Thank
Will
you.
do.
All right, good. Good talking to you guys.
All right, guys.
All right.
Anytime.
Take
Okay,
care.
bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.